All right. So we'll start out with background. I grew up a farm girl in Ohio. Both my parents were from Florida, so they dragged us down there during my senior year of high school, and I'm like, I need to head west. And that's what I did, and got my graduate degrees, most of them out west, until my professor dragged me back east. But then I came back west. I fell in love with the desert and have done most of my work in the desert since then. I just absolutely love it. And I'm at Texas Tech now. And you'll see a picture of my daughter in this, and she just started college at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point because she did not want me as one of her professors. So with that, I'll start. So what if I told you that the southwestern U.S. is in the midst of a drought worse than any other in the past 1,200 years? Yeah. And so as a wildlife biologist, it makes me worry about the future for our desert wildlife, especially things like amphibians, like toads, because they depend on waters and pools of waters for both habitat and for hydration. And the thing is, climate change affects both of those. And so the decisions that these toads make about that habitat that they're using can have big consequences. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Sex, water, and bad decisions. All right, so picture this. You are a desert toad. You are hanging out there. You live up in the rocks, but come down into these ephemeral streams, into the pools of water in there to breed during the monsoon season. But when the rains come, it's really patchy. It's really unpredictable. And it's hot. It is so hot. And it's been months since there's been any rain. And when the rains come, if they come, is there going to be enough to pool near you? Is it going to be safe? Is that pool going to last long enough so your eggs can turn into tadpoles and can emerge as little toadlets? These questions they're uncertain now because of climate change. We don't know the answers to that. They don't know the answers to that. And so we're going to talk about climate change and how it is altering the system and altering the experience of toads and their future in the Sonoran Desert, which next door. So we're going to start out with the scene, basically talking a little bit about the Sonoran Desert, then talking a little bit about what climate is doing to the Sonoran Desert, introducing you to the desert toads that I work on, before giving you a little background, and then we'll get into the story. But I promise I'm not taking a ton of time on the first stuff. But just to let you know. So the arrow up there is approximately where most of this research has been done. That's where I do a lot of my work. And so this is the Sonoran Desert. We've got rugged mountain ranges, volcanic rock, and giant columnar cactus. And it's hot. It is really, really hot. Last year, they had 143 days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. The closest I could find to here was Las Cruces, Chihuahuan Desert, 35 days. So it's not just hot, it's relentless. And most of the waters out there, at least in the part of the Sonoran that I'm working, are these small isolated pools of water. Both the constructed catchments that land managers have put in on your left, these are little troughs, sometimes called guzzlers, but they're little troughs hooked up to reservoirs that are filled by rain, and then that water is released into that trough, and they're designed to minimize evaporation because you want to keep water out there as long as possible. And then the natural system, the Tanahas on your right, these are erosional depressions in the bedrock that have been used through history by the toads, by other wildlife, by the Hohokam, by the O'odham, by the Peepash people. And actually, just as an aside, when you go out there, there is incredible rock art around these sites, just letting you know how historically important that they are. But back to the toads. They're absolutely tied to these waters for reproduction. So in this system, when the rains hit, the romance begins. Okay, that's the scene. Now let's throw climate change on top of it. Climate change is altering the environment and all the everything that the toads are experiencing. So we're going to go through this. First off, it's getting hotter. And so I'm showing up here for the area that I'm working in. Right now, we've increased in temperature about 4.5 to 5.5 degrees. By the end of the century, it's going to be over 9 degrees. And that might not sound like a lot, but it's absolutely huge because it has a lot of different effects. First one, heat is a form of energy. You're adding energy into the atmosphere, which means you're getting all this weather variability. So you have more heat waves, more droughts, giant storms dumping tons of water all at once, and then long periods of dryness. So in addition to that, climate change and the heat is affecting the water cycle. So if you think about it, water cycle is precipitation coming down, moving through the system, and then evaporation and transpiration, like from plants going up, and we call that evapotranspiration. And so when you add heat to the system, that whole cycle speeds up, but the evaporation part and the transpiration part heats up faster, or it increases its rate faster than the precipitation, which means less water. And we can see that. This is work done by Seeger in 2007, and he took existing data and then projected into the future water availability in the southwestern US, and it's going down, and we're seeing that. And I'm sure you guys are seeing it here as well, which of course means it's getting drier. And so by mid-century, at least for the area that I've been working in, they're expecting an increase in droughts by 15 to 20%, which when it's been in drought for forever, that just, yeah. All right, so we're gonna talk about the players down there in my research before we get to the star of the show. But first, let me introduce you to the life cycle of the frog, just in case any of you don't know. But the desert toads out there live up in the terrestrial system around. And then when the monsoons hit, they come down to these pools of water. They scream at each other, they have big orgies, and they lay their eggs. Those eggs, I promise sex, those eggs then develop into tadpoles, and those tadpoles then emerge as little toadlets and go about their business. But that means that they have to get through their development before the site dries up. And so this is not the whole Sonoran Desert, but in the area that I've been working, there are 3 main species of toads. We've got the Sonoran Desert toad, which is the big chonky one, my favorite toad, but he just doesn't sing very much, so he's very hard to get information on reproduction. We're still working on that, though. And then we've got the desert-adapted Couch's spadefoot that's trying to amplex the Sonoran Desert toad. Don't know if you noticed that. They're really, really amazing. They go from laying the eggs, and the eggs can develop into little spadefoots in 8 days, as few as 8 days. Absolutely amazing. But the star of the show tonight is going to be the red-spotted toads. These are ones that they're easy to find, so I have lots of good data on them. They live in those rocky areas around the arroyos, the desert washes, and then when it rains, they come on down to breed. And their tadpoles take about 6 to 9 weeks to develop. So it's a much bigger chunk of time than the spadefoot. Okay, tiny bit more information so you know what's going on. So I've been working down in the desert, down in the Sonoran Desert, for about 3 decades now. And in that time, my work I've looked at invertebrates, I've looked at, the big fuzzies like desert bighorn, mule deer, but my favorites are the toads, the amphibians. They're just awesome. But my lab and I have looked at these waters. We've looked at the species that come to visit. We've measured the water conditions. We've even mapped their spatial arrangement so we can look at their connectivity for species. Can the species actually get among them? And the whole goal of this work is to understand our desert waters better so we can manage them better. Because right now we're dealing with climate change and we need to be very careful about our water resources. Okay, now, last little bit before we get into it. So at the bottom of some of these slides are citations. If anyone is interested in the papers they came from, you can email me, I can get them to you, no problem. You can even just describe the slide and I'll send it to you, no problem. But this is a conceptual diagram. It's a bit simplified from what I published back in 2016. But don't think of it as a conceptual model. Think of it as a storyboard. This combines the ecology of the toads and their environment with toad physiology and how that's impacting the toads and their reproduction and so forth. And so we've got on the left side, quantity of water, and on the right side, quality of water. And so I'm going to take you through this step by step. It's just going to be how we structure the talk tonight. So, okay, now we get to the story. All right. So I talked about how climate change is heating up the atmosphere, so we're getting more evaporation than precipitation, less water availability. But it's worse than that. Because if you notice this Tanaha over here, it's just a little cup. I mean, they aren't all that deep. Some of them are a little more deep, but they're not all that deep. And so I told you that we were getting our precipitation in fewer events, but more intense events. So more rain coming all at once. Well, what happens when your cup fills up? Everything else just runs off. And so even if we got the same amount of rain, it wouldn't matter. If it comes in fewer events, that means that cup still can only hold so much, and it's evaporating faster. And that means the amphibians out there have a smaller window of time in order to breed and embryos develop and then emerge as toadlets. Okay. I hit a slide. Oh no, that's all right. Okay, so also the toads are vulnerable just because of their life history. And so what I have here is a graph from a paper we did looking at climate vulnerability in desert reptiles and amphibians. And I only cut out the piece that showed the amphibians. And vulnerability is a combination of climate vulnerability. It's a combination of, so across the range, how exposed are they to changes in temperature and precipitation? Because that's kind of patchy, the amount that it's changing. In addition to that, you add in life history, physiology, ecology, and you combine those into one metric. And what I want you to notice here is we've got our species listed across the bottom. It doesn't matter what they are, but most of those species, all of the native species, rank as highly vulnerable or extremely vulnerable. The only species that does not is the invasive eastern bullfrog. And so remember that because we're going to come back to that a little bit later. Okay, so we know these guys are vulnerable to the environment or to climate change because they rely on water. But they've been out there, they've evolved there for thousands of years. Maybe they just breed during rainy seasons. Maybe they've evolved so they just take advantage of when it's good. And what I have here is a graph with, on the bottom is precipitation at the individual sites. And then on the vertical axis, I have culling index. And let me introduce you to that because I'm going to use that a couple times. When we're recording amphibian calls, we use this four-measure index, where 0 means there's nothing calling, 1 means you've got individuals calling, but there's no overlap between calls. 2 is there's some overlap, but you can still tell the individuals, like what I showed you earlier. And then the 3 is a full-on chorus. And you know, as a biologist, any amphibian biologist has tried to figure out how to pull apart that 3, and we just have to put it as a 3 because you can't tell how many are out there. But back to the graph. What's happening is they don't care. We're still getting these full-on choruses when there's very, very little rain happening at a given site. And that's the summer precipitation. Okay, so they aren't paying attention to overall droughts. But, you know, they could just avoid the sites that dry fast. I mean, they could just pick the big sites. They don't. So there's a pair that was getting ready to amplex up there. I decided to make this one G rather than R. And the other figure, I don't know if you can tell, but there are a whole lot of little black spots. Those are thousands of tadpoles. Thousands. They'll use anything. If there's water, they're going to use it. So the toads need water long enough for tadpole development, but they don't care. They are not including that in their evaluation of where they're going to breed. The toads don't care. Okay, so that was one half of our storyboard. The other half has to do with water quality, because maybe that they pick sites with better conditions. So their tadpoles have a better chance of getting through and making it through development and becoming toadlets and so forth. So what happens when you increase temperature is you increase production. And so you can see both a tanaha and a catchment with a very thick layer of algae on both. I mean, these things are pretty nasty. But what's going on is that temperature is increasing biological activity. So you've got metabolism, you've got production, you've got decomposition, and you also have got waste. So shit is happening. In particular, there are nitrogen ions. So we've got ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite. And this is also important because all these things are producing more and more of this because their metabolisms are sped up, but the site's drying faster, so the concentration is going up faster than it was previously. Now we're going to focus on ammonia. And here I've split up the tanahas and the catchments because the dynamics are a little bit different. And I want to take this with me, gosh darn it. So I'm showing you data here from 2019. And the reason I'm using 2019 here is my lab was all gung-ho about volunteering and going out over Christmas and camping in the desert and taking water quality data. We even got snowed on, which was really cool, being in the Sonoran Desert, getting snowed on. But that meant we got water quality in the winter. And so on your left, you can see the water quality for the catchments. And you can see it's pretty equivalent all the way through. It's a little bit lower before the monsoon rains start, and this is because by this time the managers were more diligent about mucking out the sites, so clearing out the gunk that accumulates on the bottom. Now the Tanahas, you can see there's a lot of ammonia in there before the rains hit. Basically, any of those that still have water, it's really nasty. But once the rains hit, and there are rains in the Sonoran in the summer and in the winter, it's got a bimodal rainfall pattern, that went away. And that's because these kind of reset with the monsoons or with rains, strong rains. So we've got a picture of a Tanaha that's empty, and this is from a game camera, one that's filling up with water and then overflowing. And when you get enough rain, it overflows and just pushes all of that out, and everything's reset, and you have really good water quality. And then things start colonizing again. But perfect timing. Okay, this is also important because ammonia is really bad for amphibians. Lots of aquatic organisms, it's not good for them. We as humans actually take in a bunch of ammonia in our diet. We're fine with it, although I wouldn't want to drink it. But they are not. And so based on research done on amphibians in places that don't have dynamics like this, the EPA, actually amphibians, fish, other things as well, the EPA has set their freshwater standards for aquatic life at 1.9 milligrams per liter of nitrogen from ammonia. That means over 30 days it can't exceed that. That's down there. And when I saw the amount of ammonia, I was not expecting it. I was like, oh my gosh. So when love happens, at least in this year, the Tanahas look pretty good. But the catchments do not. So that's just looking at all the sites. It's not considering what the amphibians are using. So again, they've evolved in this system. The water gets nasty. Maybe they avoid those sites. And so in this one, I have the choruses along the bottom and the ammonia on the vertical axis. And we still get full-on choruses with ammonia higher than the EPA is worried about. Okay, that's not good. And one of the reasons it's not good is because in 2019, we had a good rain year. So the Tanahas cleared out. But we've had a lot of years that have been droughts. Actually, most of the years have been droughts. And during that, the Tanahas don't clear. So 2021 was a great rain year out there. And so both were pretty low. 2020 was not a good rain year. And so both the catchments and the Tanahas were bad. And with more frequent and longer droughts, that means the water quality is pretty gosh darn nasty. So, not a lot of water, toads don't care. Water is kind of like a cesspool, toads don't care. Well, okay. But they evolved in this system. I mean, they should be able to handle this. I mean, they've been living with these conditions because there's been droughts before. Well, so we went out and we decided to look at the effects it would have on tadpoles. And what we did is we measured a whole bunch of tadpoles and we calculated this scaled body size index. Basically, it's a metric of chonkiness. It's like the resources that tadpole has when it gets to the point that it's going through metamorphosis, it uses that to get through that period and become a toadlet. Because during that period, they don't feed. Their mouth parts are changing, so they need those resources. And just as an aside, the smirking person, that's my child who just started. She decided she liked field work, just doesn't want to have me as a teacher. Okay, so what we found, we've got the ammonia this time on the horizontal axis and the body condition on this vertical axis. And there is a very real and very significant impact of that ammonia. Body condition goes down significantly the more ammonia we have. But it's worse than that. Because notice, that axis only goes up to 4 milligrams per liter. In that year, we were getting full choruses up to 26 milligrams per liter. So what was likely going on is in order to measure the tadpoles, we wanted to get them large enough that, handling them in the net, we weren't going to cause harm. Because if you've ever tried to pick up a tiny tadpole, they just smear. We didn't want that. We wanted them bigger than that. And so that meant we were going out 2 to 3 weeks after the rain events to measure them. And by then, any of the sites that would have had tadpoles with high concentrations of ammonia, they died. They aren't there. And this is based on some of the work I did during my PhD. But we aren't talking about that, because that's Minnesota. All right. So what we have here are sites that are drying up, that are bad water quality, and toads that just aren't paying attention. They don't care about amount. They don't care about the conditions, but they should care. It is harming their young. But again, okay, maybe they live long enough. So, if as long as they have a few good years, they can have tadpoles emerge and do all right. So maybe they just live long enough. So we looked at that. And you've probably heard of dendrochronology, where you look at tree rings and you count them to figure out how old the tree is. We did that with bones. You can do that, and we did finger clips on non-dominant fingers because we were doing a landscape genetics project to look at some disease things that were going as well. But we also used those samples to look at age for the red-spotted toad. And what we found were individuals everywhere from about 2 to 8 years old, the average being 5.4 years. There was a study done in the 90s, a little bit north of Phoenix. Put this in context. Arizona has been in a mega drought since 2000. What you're looking at here is the percent of Arizona in drought for 25 years. And so when you're having more and more drought, this is going to have significant consequences for these guys. Are they going to last long enough? So they don't care about amount. They don't care about quality, but they should care. They really should care. So what I've told you so far is a tragedy. But we're not going to stop there, because there are ways we've been working on to provide solutions to help them kind of last a bit longer, mitigate some of the effects of climate change. So we're going to talk about some of this work. So first off, not my work, but at least this part, the most obvious thing you can do is provide more water. And wildlife managers have been doing this in arid regions for a long, long time. Arizona has had a water supplementation program going since the 1940s. These are focused most of the time on the big fuzzies. And I call them big fuzzies because a colleague of mine calls my amphibians the small and slimy, so, you know. But these things were designed for things like mule deer and Sonoran pronghorn, desert bighorn, so forth. And so water is either trucked or in some cases flown to important catchments and even to Nahas during times when water is needed. And so this is a paper in review right now that we have looking at 6 different species of large mammals. And what's really good is that they need water the same time the toads do. So basically from April through October, and that fully covers when the toads would be breeding. So we've got coincidence there, which is positive, because they use the catchments too. The little eye shine you see at the bottom of the arrows, those are Sonoran desert toads. They're easier to see. The red-spotted toads use these too. It's just the Sonoran desert ones are easier to see. Okay, now, but it's more complex than just putting more waters out. And it's more complex than what I told you earlier, isn't it always? So what I am showing here, gosh darn it, I need to take this with me. So we've got rain on the bottom, and the graph is split up into those constructed catchments and the Tanahas. And I'm going to explain the Tanahas first. So the black dotted line is a calling index of 3. That's a full-on chorus. And so that graph is showing us the toads love Tanahas. Now, if you're over here on the constructed catchments, when there's not a lot of rain, like very, very little rain, most of the calling there is like not, 0 or 1s. And we just put those together because, you know, when you have a lone male calling, you're really not going to have much in the way of reproduction. And then the 2s kind of come up, and then after about 150 millimeters of rain or so, we start getting calling index of 3. So we start getting full choruses at catchments. But it's not that the catchments themselves are the problem. It's the placement. So the location is really, really important. If a water site is within about 135 meters of the toad's like terrestrial habitat, they'll use it. They'll do full-on choruses. It doesn't matter if it's a catchment or a Tanaha or a train. So I'm going to give it okay, so location's really important. And again, location, location, location. I told you earlier that one of the things we did is we looked at the placements of these waters. Okay, so this is the same map. The black dots are waters. The red spots, remember I talked about the eastern bullfrog? Those are established populations of the eastern bullfrog. And in the left graph, there are some green dots. Those are waters that are basically providing potentially a way for the bullfrog to get into this system of Tanahas, catchments, and so forth, into this system of waters. Now notice in the middle there's a constriction part, an area underserved by waters. So we could actually if we place them differently, have the same amount of water out there, put them down in that underserved area, we could keep the exotic species, so the eastern bullfrog, crayfish, all those sorts of things out, because we'd have a buffer around this network of waters that things like native toads and all those big fuzzies that we're not worried about right now. And so we can actually, with placement, guard against that invasion. So putting more waters in can work because the timing coincides for the large mammals. It improves the amount of water, but we have to pay attention to where they're located so that we're supporting the native species and not invasive species. And the next thing we can do is just clean the damn things. I mean, they are so nasty in the bottom because what happens is you've got these systems where you have tons of algae. You have a bunch of dead bees. We have lots of Africanized bees down there. Things die in there, so there's just all this muck on the bottom. And as that muck decomposes, that's what's releasing the ammonia. So if you clean it out, you can have a measurable effect. It's not quite good enough because the red X, before they were as diligent about cleaning it out, that would be the average. And so cleaning out does have an impact. In fact, that time period when they weren't doing as well cleaning them, we were measuring up to 50 milligrams per liter. It was just ridiculous. So cleaning them. And the cleaning has kind of two positive things. So it improves water quality, but it also improves water quantity because you're getting rid of all that muck, and so there's more room for the water. And then we also tried aerating them. So basically, I don't know if anyone has a fish tank, but if you use bubblers in them, this is basically what we did. Because one of the ways that ammonia off-gases, it volatilizes, or one of the ways it leaves the system is it volatilizes. And so these things are so small that they aren't getting stirred up. So if you put a bubbler in there, it stirs it up and you should lose more ammonia from the system. And we do see that. The problem is we had a couple desert lessons. Turns out that small mammals absolutely love electric cords. And any number of species love pulling hoses out of the water. So the next iteration probably would be wind power. But this is still something that we're working on. So that one's a work in progress. But there are things we can do. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, I'm going back. There are things we can do. We can put more water out there, but in places that support our native species. We can improve the water quality and quantity by pulling that muck out, and we can actually support that better by increasing that natural off-gassing of ammonia. Now, none of these are perfect solutions, but working together, they give the toads a chance. Because these species are out there, they require this water, and climate change is having this huge impact on both quality and quantity. And if we want to have a future for the desert toads, we need to figure out how to give them a chance. And the best way we can give any desert wildlife a chance to survive the changes that we are causing is to give them time. We need to give them time to adapt to those conditions. And so maybe, if they have enough time, that we will see changes and it won't be a tragedy anymore. Instead of this tragedy that I've been telling you about, It might turn into a story of resilience and persistence, and maybe a few more loud choruses during the summer. And thank you so much for coming. And I'm happy, well, first I want to thank, I have a lot of people that have worked with me, that have funded this and so forth, that I couldn't do it without them. I also want to thank you guys for coming and showing up and listening to me talk about toads. I love talking about toads. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes? So if there are bullfrogs in the Tanahas, are you asking what impacts the bullfrogs have? Okay. So bullfrogs are voracious. The tadpoles, not the tadpoles, the adults are voracious. In fact, they'll colonize waters and then they'll end up establishing because they'll eat their own tadpoles, which, yeah. And so any of the native ones get hammered when the bullfrog comes in. And I will say it's the waters that last longer that are most at risk from the bullfrogs. So, yes?
What are the downstream effects? I mean, the tragedy of the toads themselves is bad enough, but I assume there are species of birds or other things that may depend on them as a food source as well. So what are some of those downstream?
So the question was, what are some of the downstream effects? Talking about the indirect effects of the impact on toads in terms of the ecosystem. I don't know anyone working on that right now because, well, first off, there aren't many people working on amphibians in the desert like this because, come on, who would do that? And so we have been, and we're starting a new project where we're doing a lot more game camera work, but these sites, to get out to them, it's an hour and a half on incredibly bad, most people would not call them roads. And so trying to get at the intricate pieces, we haven't been able to do yet. Yes?
Okay, so I understand how the frogs and toads deal with water when and which hopefully coincides with the time of year they normally breed. But how in the heck do they survive not turning into potato chips?
So the question was, how do they survive the dry season and not turn into potato chips? So they go back up, like this species goes back up into the rocks, way in the rocks. And so once you get down, it gets far enough down, it's cooler, and there's more water. And they can hold almost 100% of their body weight in water. And so what we'll find, well, and couches may estivate. So some of them estivate. But trying to find that stuff, because you actually have to dig them up to find them, nobody's going to let me do that.
So like here, I live at the base of Sleeping Lion Mountain in Fort Davis. And this year, after the rains, I had a red-spotted toad hop into my laundry room. So excited.
Yes.
And so they're living in the cracks and crevices of the mountain?
Deep inside. So they're the ones that like the cracks and crevices. And if there is any water anywhere, they can come out and just lay on it, and they'll absorb water. And so we'll sometimes see them out in sites not calling and not breeding before the rains hit, just absorbing water.
Because the past 2 years, for each year, we had 5 inches of rain.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing.
It is. I agree. And I'm waiting for technology to catch up so we can put on small enough like radio transmitters and I can figure out where the heck they're going. But they aren't small enough yet. Yes?
How did you determine the age of the toad? Did you say with a finger?
So we took finger clips because we're doing a landscape genetics project looking at diseases and how they're amphibian diseases and how they're moving through the system. But we could use those samples for multiple things. And so we took the bone and took everything else out for the genetics thing. And then we sliced it really, really thin and set them and dyed them, stained them, and then we could count those rings. On the bone. Yep.
So it's like tree rings.
It's exactly like tree rings. I have no idea. Back in the back.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I love this talk about toads. I live in Valentine, and you've had a lot of rain this year, and there have been so many toads. And it's wonderful. And
Yes.
I feel like there's a lot of similarities between toads and humans. Now, could you speak to those similarities for us?
I don't know if I can. Let me think. I mean, they're on making bad decisions.
Being resilient.
Oh, being resilient. Yes, we are resilient. We can come back from a lot of things, and we have a big impact on systems. So, yeah. You're getting into things that the Texas state legislature has said I can't talk about. So I can only offer my opinion on certain things related to my research. When we're starting to get into humans, there have been people who've been fired. So I apologize for not answering that question, especially since this is going online. Yep, we definitely both need water. Yes?
I was wondering, you have to leave, in a regular year, you have at least 2 monsoons. Do the frogs breed anytime there's water? Do they breed twice a year? Do they just go wild whenever there's enough water? Or the toads?
That's a good question that we looked at. We collect the calling using audio data loggers, and they aren't calling during the winter rains. They're not calling up until like June. We have had like a single red-spotted toad in May, but nothing that would be breeding. That might be my phone.
Would that possibly have to do with the likelihood of the temperature being too low for them? Sorry about that. So they do what's it called? They pay attention to this.
Right. So the same species further south, down just below the border in El Pinacate, actually does have some breeding in the winter. I don't know why the ones we have up on the Barium Goldwater Range are not. It may have to do with habitat, because there's something written about stream versus these pools, but we were just funded to do a project that we're going to be looking at that. So, yes. Light, different environmental gradients, yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first is, what is the food source? And the second is, of the 3 native species that you mentioned, have any of them ever been on any endangered lists?
I'm going to answer the second one first because it's easy. No, which is good. But when you're dealing with species that are so tied to water, then you really start worrying, even if they're common species. Okay, the first question was, what do they eat? Okay, so the tadpoles are detritivores. So they eat all that gunk that's building up. They'll eat algae and everything in there. And that recolonizes actually pretty quick after the monsoons flush everything out. As adults, they eat any type of insects. Actually, they eat anything they can fit in their mouth. So the Sonoran desert toad probably eats small mammals, small birds as well. They're big. Yes, they respond to movement and will eat anything that fits in their mouth. Yes. What species depends on them? And so that's probably also getting at the question from up there earlier. So there are probably the raptors, the owls, especially the owls, because they're more often out at night. There's some things like badgers, probably the coyotes. So there's small mammals, there's birds. Yes, there are snakes, definitely. We haven't seen any black bears there. We've seen mountain lions, but yeah, but no bears. Yes?
Have you documented success, breeding success through metamorphosis in the areas where in the places where you put bubblers or where you cleaned out the catchments?
We have not. The problem with getting them through metamorphosis and catching them when they get out is the game cameras don't trigger, and you have to be out there at that time to actually find them as they're emerging. And so the project that we're starting on, looking at the gradients, we're going to have a set of game cameras. So one of them is going to be focused on the water surface, and it's going to take pictures at standard times throughout the day so we can get that question answered. And we have a better idea on the production. Any others? Yes? So the question is, could aquatic plants be introduced into the catchments to keep the water clean? There's algae in all of them. There is one that does have some plants in it, but it still has a buildup. I think that it's so small and there is so much that builds up in there that it doesn't work. And keeping them going, well, I guess there's one site, I don't know, someone decided to put fish in it and plants. And so there's like this fish tank out in the middle of nowhere. Very strange. We also haven't seen amphibians in that one because of the fish. But so, yeah. Any more questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kerry. And thank you, all of you. I loved the questions. That's always my favorite part, the questions and answer session. We have snacks out front and beer, wine, and non-alcoholic drinks if you'd like something like that. And you can visit with Kerry and stay a while. Okay, thanks for coming.